This podcast and its related content are intended for listeners aged 18 and above. Some episodes may include sensitive topics such as trauma, abuse, or mental health struggles that could be emotionally triggering or distressing. Listener discretion is strongly advised. This podcast is created for educational and awareness purpose only and does not constitute legal, medical, or psychological advice. Welcome to Sunoh, the listening circle. The name Sunoh in Hindi means to listen, and more importantly, to be understood. This podcast aims to create a circle of understanding for South Asian women primarily, and anyone else who may be interested in these topics, from changing family structures to work-life balance, motherhood, singlehood, and much more. We are hoping to shake off stigma one conversation at a time. This season, we are looking at separation and divorce in the South Asian context. And I'm your host, Harveen. So the guest today for many in South Asian community, especially in Sri Lanka and Australia, does not need any introduction. Her early years were spent in Sri Lanka, and when she was merely 4 years old, her parents immigrated to Australia, leaving a war-torn situation to give their children a better life. She grew up in Australia and graduated from University of Technology, Sydney, where she studied design and visual communication and graduated with first-class honors. She has quite the entrepreneurial streak and started her first business, Gather and Stitch Couture, when she was just 22. The second one, Gather and Stitch Beauty, which is Sydney-based hair and makeup styling, came shortly after. And the latest, Homegrown, a personal branding, marketing, and PR company about a decade after that. And let's not forget that in many ways, she's a writer as well, writing about her experience through poetry and sharing it through social media. I believe, Helani, you also won an award recently, so maybe you'll tell us about that shortly. Welcome, Helani, and I'm delighted to be speaking to you today. Tell us a little bit more about this award that you've recently received.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful introduction. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for having me as well on your podcast. The award that I received recently was a really lovely example of creating your own table. So there's this brown boss babes kind of community here that has been building up over many years, and the South Asian community in Australia especially is growing. One of the girls who runs it, she decided to create this award ceremony to appreciate and acknowledge South Asian women excellence in business. And I was in the fashion category for Gather and Stitch, and then I won that category. And then I was also nominated for Business Woman of the Year, which was very nice, especially because it was 15 years of Gather and Stitch. So it felt like a nice way to kind of round that up.
And what a fantastic note to start, because this is a very inspirational moment for many South Asian women. And especially for the kind of topic we're talking today, much, much more to learn from you here. Now, I'm thinking about when we first connected, and while I'm not so much on social media, that's how we first met. And before going into that specific story, what really struck me about your Instagram account was the vulnerability you were willing to share with people and your honest life journey, your separation, the decision to divorce. What made you make the decision to also choose to be open about your life in that manner on social media?
I feel like I grew up not having a voice in my family, and I think it was the way I was raised to hold back on my opinion, especially a girl in a South Asian environment was always like, be still, sit still, be quiet, don't give your opinion, keep the peace. I grew up like that, and that continued into most of my life. Finally, after I separated, there was a lot going on behind the scenes. There was one moment where I was sitting in the shower going, you know what? I'm just going to tell my story. Because it felt like it was bursting from me, because I had written so much poetry and so many pieces of writing during my journey. And there was challenges, like I had to mentally prepare myself to be that vulnerable online. It felt like I could hear in my nightmares other women going through what I went through, and I couldn't help them somehow. So I felt like if I shared it, and if at least one person felt also seen and heard, like how much I didn't feel seen and heard by, the authority figures or my parents or whoever it was, even my friends who are trying to help and were there for me, they can't actually feel what you're going through. I didn't imagine it to be received the way it has been received.
All the people that I've been trying to talk to now for the podcast, almost all of them have similar experiences. And the voice aspect and giving that space, not everyone has the courage for that. So thank you for having that courage and creating that space. Because when I first interacted with you, I had noticed this particular Instagram reel. And while sharing this vulnerable experience, you had a lot of supportive responses, but there were also some challenging comments that people were sharing about your post. And I just reached out to you on a human level because having gone through my divorce and not finding the space to express what I was feeling or be understood in a safe manner, and seeing that some of the comments were critical to what you were saying, it just shocked me that it might have left a deep impact on you as well, because some of them are not so nice to hear when you are sharing such a vulnerable situation from your life. And we had a really nice exchange, you and I. And I'm glad we did because actually I got a lot of strength from you. Even though my divorce process was already concluded for almost 2 years, yours was still going on. And perhaps that is also the advantage of social media, that it can connect people so unexpectedly, which it did for us. But my question to you would be that how do you navigate this space that also has the potential of bringing a darker side of people? And how do you respond to that negativity that comes to you? Because you've done that with a lot of poise and a lot of positivity. What gives you the strength? What is your approach to it?
I grew up in a society that's very judgmental and opinionated. And I was one of the people who always did my own thing regardless. I was always like in the community, so to speak. I was so very well involved and I did a lot of extracurricular activities. So I would say I was like a public figure, if you could say, from a very young age into being able to handle negative comments. But this particular thing is very personal, so it was very unlike anything I had been vulnerable about before. But I think I was at a much better place by the time I did start to share it. I was confident in myself and what I had gone through. I had processed a lot of it internally. I was well into my healing journey and very grounded. And I feel like I had the tools that I needed to be able to handle those comments. Any negative comment or anything we really say is coming from our own opinion and our own insecurity. If it is negative, it's not about you, it's about the other person. Most of those comments were from people on the other side of the world. And to be honest, I've had a lot worse said to me by the people that are meant to love me.
Thanks for sharing that because that sounds bittersweet because you've had the courage, but as you said, dealing with strangers and loved ones and what that experience has meant to be. So before we delve into that part of your story, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your growing up years and about how your family structure and your life was in your formative years. Also, the type of examples of couplehood you saw around and how did that shape you?
I think most migrant children or most migrant Sri Lankan children, most of us came here at a young age. I came here when I was 4 years old. My sister was 2. And I think our parents brought with them the need to make sure that we were safe, well looked after, and had a good life, I guess, in their definition of a good life, which was having a good education and being married. And then growing up, I didn't feel like I was very constrained, or I knew my parents were strict, but I knew the place they were coming from, especially looking back. The way that they loved us, the way that they raised us was very much a reflection of how they were raised and what they thought was right. Having had a daughter myself now, I raise her very differently. And I think it's a reflection of the times that we're in as well. There's a lot of attention towards conscious parenting and gentle parenting. Comparing how I raised my daughter and comparing how I was raised, I understand how I was the way I was and how I accepted particular behaviors towards me. My parents, that was their version of love. but it's not mine. It's a very tricky relationship that migrant children I feel have with our parents, most of us, not all of us, where we love them, but also we don't necessarily condone the way things are done. So it's a tricky relationship and a tricky thing to understand, give love to, and still be around. I think I saw in my parents that the dad or like the male figure was the one who was in charge of the finances, made the decisions. Both of them worked really hard, but my mum would be the one who was more the homemaker. My dad didn't really help out with any of the chores around the house or made meals or anything like that. So that's the exposure we got. Very abrupt language towards each other most of the time, not all the time, and very minimal physical affection and words of affirmation, which is very different from the way that I raised my daughter. So I think growing up, that's the kind of role models and examples we had, and not only in my life, but in all the parents and the families that we saw around us.
And did you think that any of this was in conflict with the cultures you were growing up with? Because you were kind of growing up with both the Sri Lankan and Australian culture. And I'm assuming, it seems from what you're answering, is that the Sri Lankan culture was more prominent in your life?
Yeah, I think I was exposed to only mostly Sri Lankan family dynamics. I had my friends who were not Sri Lankan background. I saw their parents, but it wasn't in detail. So I don't think I got to see it. I think my exposure to something different was from TV or movies. That's when you see like parents kissing or people showing affection in other ways. But you don't think it's abnormal or you just accept it as it is. And I think that's both the danger and the beauty of being a child growing up is that you accept it as it is and what it is to be right.
How was navigating career? Were there specific expectations from you, from your family? Also, when it comes to the strict parents aspect that you mentioned, was that also about your dating life? Can you elaborate a bit more?
So, in terms of education, my parents realized quite early on that my sister and I were quite artistic and creative, and they were happy for us to pursue that. So we both were able to follow our dreams in that way. And I think that's why it was so easy for me to start a business. I remember conversations where my dad would get a call in the night and someone would be telling them that we were going to fail because we dropped maths and science. So he would say things like, you worry about your children and I'll worry about mine. And he really like supported us through that, and my mom as well. And then in terms of dating and the strictness, I don't think it was ever said that we couldn't have boyfriends, but it was always assumed. And I remember my mom once telling me, you should definitely marry a Sri Lankan Buddhist. Otherwise, there's going to be a fight ahead. I didn't properly date till I was like just finishing uni.
So this means that from your career and education point of view, actually, you got a lot more creative freedom and the flexibility. But when it comes to relationships or dating, you did feel constrained because of what your parents were allowing you in your social life. And how did this make you feel vis-a-vis your friend circle?
Most of my friends were the same. I feel like our parents brought Sri Lanka with them. And even though Sri Lanka progressed and changed, they didn't. I think someone needs to do like some research into that, because when people migrate, they like capture that essence of the community and that time and they bring it, and then they hold on to that without evolving. Whereas my cousins in Sri Lanka or friends were making much more liberal choices and had much more freedom because they changed with the times that Sri Lanka was changing with. So it's super interesting.
This is very common for quite a few of the immigrant children that I've spoken to, or even in my family and friend circle. They have a similar feeling that a lot of times the parents carry the culture in the new countries and they really want to preserve that. Whereas back in the country, things are changing much faster. So, with that kind of a setup, if we go to when you met your ex husband, where were you in life at that point of time and how did that story transpire then?
We met in my last year of university, but I'd actually known him since we were children. going to like our language school together. So we knew each other. And then towards the later end of teenage years, we were in the same friendship groups and we all had similar upbringings and things like that. Meeting when you're 21 and then getting married at 25. Now I think, oh my gosh, 25 is so young to get married. Don't make that decision then. No, wait until you're 30. All my friends were getting married at that time. And I had just started my business. It's not like I had like a steady income coming. I'd never lived out of home. I'd never like had a proper independent view or a hold of who I was and how to lead my life.
In the early days, if you now look back, were there any concerns or in retrospect you saw as problems in relationship or things that now you think that, oh, that was a red flag that could have made you think twice? Were there any such moments that you've realized now?
Yeah, looking back, there's so many aspects. But I think being in the wedding industry, there's always so many aspects leading up to the wedding because it's very, very rare to hear of a wedding that went smooth where family didn't get involved or there was an opinion involved or there wasn't tears because it's a very high pressure environment. So looking back, yes, trust me, I've analyzed my whole like interaction of the past 13 years. And yes, of course, looking back, like there's so much that you can pick out and think about, but it's always from like an understanding of who I was at that time to be able to not see it for what it was, I think. Because we're so young. I just don't think we've lived enough life experience yet to know.
At what point do you think, like when you were married, did things begin to change and the relationship wasn't as you thought it to be? How many years into the marriage was that?
I think it was about 8 years in, 9 years in. It was like quite a while later that I think COVID really brought out because in Sydney we were in lockdown, so we weren't allowed to leave our homes. It was just our family. Whoever was living in the dwelling that was staying together. So it was myself, my ex-husband, and my daughter who was together. When you have the same people in front of you every day, that's when you start to take more notice of what's happening because before you'd have work or something and you'd have different ways you can balance and feel fulfilled. During COVID, both my businesses also couldn't function because they were in the wedding industry and weddings had to stop. So I didn't have work to focus on either. New mom, postpartum depression, and everything kind of comes to the forefront. And I think that's when I realized this is not what I thought it was. It was like unhealthy dynamics brought on by unresolved generational or internal trauma. So from both parties, how we were raised and what we had absorbed from our family dynamics was coming to the forefront and how that was affecting our current relationship. And unless you analyze, understand, evolve, and grow, it's just not going to work.
And since you did have a child already and these issues were springing up, what did that do for you? How was the parenting process? Was it shared equally? Were there also challenges there?
I don't think there's any couple that doesn't have parenting differences or issues. There were differences in ideas towards parenting, but most of the time, I think we agree, but the reaction to particular events, like something breaking or something falling or crying, that was different. But otherwise, the parenting aspect, most of it was quite similar. But at the end of the day, kids absorb and they become who they see, not who you tell them to be. So if I had stayed and continued, I knew my daughter would either be me or she would be like my ex-husband. I didn't want any of those scenarios to happen. So I had to make a change in order just to stop the cycle.
That's a good phrase to remember this section by for us that, kids become who they see than what they are told. So then coming to your own decision, when you decided that
now I'm fully clear that I want to leave this marriage. Was there a single moment that brought you that clarity and that took all the doubts that you had? How was that for you?
I think there was a build up in terms of lots of little things happening and me becoming more and more aware of what reality was, which is really hard when you're in a situation like I was in to actually know what's real and what's not real. It's a very common byproduct of going through what I went through. So once I started to realize what was actually blatantly so real to me and it was almost impossible to ignore, I realized that I really don't want this from this day on. And there was like a day where I was like, you know what? Done. But having said that, it is a pattern of wanting to leave, not being able to leave, or thinking you should stay, and then wanting to leave again, and then going back on it. And it will be your own traumas, fears, worries, and stresses, but then also the actions of the other person will be a pattern as well, which will impact your decision. So yeah, even though the decision was made, it's still like a cycle. And I see people trapped in the cycle all the time. I was in that too for about a year, I think.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, I think I'm trying to look back at my own decision process. I think there were maybe almost 2 years when this whole conversation kept going on in my head. And every now and then I would find a way to justify to myself that, no, I should continue because of XYZ reason. And for me, the moment of clarity happened when something very drastic happened. But at the same time, it made me feel so isolated in a family setup that's supposed to be mine, that's supposed to be a caring, nurturing environment. And when it suddenly felt that's not it, the decision became very crystal clear to me. And after that day, I had zero doubt. I think for me, all the smaller things, I think I chose to ignore it. But yeah, there was a moment of clarity. But coming back to also the time period when you were making this decision, because you said it was during COVID, but I don't know if any friends had ever commented outside of your marriage, if they were noticing that if things are right or not right, healthy or not. Was it totally coming down to your own realization? How was that for you?
There was definitely friends and my sister that I would share information with. There was a few number of friends that I would tell them almost every incident and every story. It was ears to listen to my story and to sympathize, but you wouldn't feel seen and heard from that. I think true feeling seen and heard comes from somebody else who's gone through the same thing. Even though if someone says it's wrong, you don't believe it until you see it. And for you to see it when you're in the cycle, it's really hard because you make excuses, like you were saying, like you go back and forth, and then you justify it with some kind of reason, which is whole part of it anyway. Even though it's right there in front of you, your brain is geared to justify it because it's been doing it for so long. It's just such a mental game to be able to get out of something like that.
What was your support like with your parents, rest of the extended family? How was that during this period when you were making this decision?
So I had the support of my cousins and my sister. My parents didn't hear me when I would call them and tell them. They told me to, not rock the boat, stay for the family, stay for my daughter and keep it together. I stopped involving them in decisions. Same with anybody else who didn't see or hear me, because nobody was going through what I was going through and nobody could make that decision for me. At the end of the day, till today, no one has seen everything that I have seen. Part of the thing is like your reality gets distorted by other people's opinions. And I wrote so much down of what was happening to make sure that no one could convince me of my reality after. No one will make that decision for you. And that is the strength that you require, that unshakable trust and belief in yourself and knowing that you're doing this for you. Because at the end of the day, it is your life and you need to empower yourself. and find the strength to get out. I know it sucks and it's hard. It's really, really hard. Like, I would be crying in bed so many nights thinking, like, feeling so alone. But having gone through that, I can tell you it's just made me more of a stronger person and more able to handle anything that goes on.
Yeah, and I love how you're articulating it, because in the end, it is your decision. And in fact, when others are giving their opinions, it only takes the time when you are fully convinced to take the decision, because all this time, it just muddles everything. But then not having the support of your parents, that must have been really hard, because I think for me in my journey, that was the one rock I had behind me, that my parents had absolute support. And in fact, because I had not shared about my journey with them, they were more concerned about the fact that why did I not share and why did I just kept going through it. So if you didn't have that support, that would have made a big impact. And how did you then cope with it and to shake it off and still have the courage?
Yeah, I mean, I talked to my kinesiologist and she's like, you're just pushing it aside and just powering through without properly like feeling the sorrow of it. I do have a relationship with my mom now. We talk almost every day. That has changed. But at that time, I didn't have the support of my parents. In fact, it was more like finding ways to go against me rather than just even passively disagree. And for me, I could not comprehend a parent not choosing their child. That just still to this day, I'm still mind blown over that, because I look at my daughter and I think there's not a chance, there's not a world we live in where I would not choose her, where I would not ask her how she's feeling or pick her side. There is no world where that would exist. Letting go of my parents' expectations and the hold that they had over me was one of the most liberating things that I've ever done. It is and was absolutely heartbreaking. It was very challenging. And I think at the end of the day, the issue here is the feeling of abandonment, the feeling of not being understood, not being seen, not being heard. That is the deep-rooted issue here. I talk about that a lot on my socials. And I think that has been the biggest thing that people have related to, which is also quite sad because I'm not the only one. And while it feels good to validate somebody else's experience or being able to articulate something that they haven't been able to share, it's so heartbreaking to know that there are more people in a situation like me. And to be honest, it's mostly women, mostly daughters, who haven't been chosen over a man. I've had people share the most incredible and heartbreaking stories with me. And one of them was when someone was sexually abused by their cousin and their mum took the cousin's side, or the family took the cousin's side. And that is so common, where the child is not chosen because they're a girl. When I realized that I wasn't being chosen because I was a woman, and therefore my opinion was emotional, irrational, and unthought through, it just wasn't taken seriously. When I realized that, I was just like, I am so much more valued. And like, I had a lot more self-love by then, that I wasn't going to stay in an environment where I wasn't appreciated, even if it was from my parents.
This is my assumption that all this is also rooted in the South Asian patriarchy and how men and women are viewed.
The one rock I had is my sister. I feel like having her support really helped. And as a result, I feel like my dad specifically was also kind of annoyed and angry at my sister for supporting me. Instead of thinking, hang on, if both my daughters are saying the same thing, maybe there's something else here going on.
How did having your daughter factor into your decision? Like either way, whether you thought you should stay or whether you should go, where did this consideration come into play as you were thinking about leaving?
I talked to so many people before I decided to leave. People who had stayed, people who had watched their parents stay. I talked to people whose parents had divorced when they were young. divorced when they were older, and the impact it had had and the things that they wish had happened. And almost unanimously, they were like, I did not grow up in a safe home because I was always anticipating a separation from my parents because they were unhappy with each other. So knowing that, I knew that if things didn't change, and I think I stayed for as long as I did because I gave so many chances for change for her, for my daughter. And then I ended up leaving for my daughter, because if I didn't make that change and if I didn't leave, everything would have continued and it would have been the same, if not worse. And I couldn't imagine living like that for the rest of my life and her growing up thinking that was okay. I think a lot of people decide that and they think that they're staying for the kids. They're not staying for the kids. They're staying because they're too scared to leave. It's not about the kids. It's actually their own internal fear. Because if it was for the kids, they would do what is best for them. And I honestly believe what is best for them is a safe and happy environment where they see love as it should be.
So even after you had this moment of clarity about separation, did you think about reconciling? And what was the period like in terms of what was actively taking place? What steps were the two of you taking, whether together or separately?
Not for me. I think after I made my decision, that was my decision. I'd already had enough. I think they say women stay for a lot longer than, like, after they've made the decision for a lot longer. I think it's a statistic. But once I was like, no, I'm going to, I stayed on that train and I did not change my mind.
How did that separation period work about? Were there, you had joint lawyers, separate lawyers? What were the practical steps happening in that period?
Yeah, so in Australia, you can decide anything you want, make those decisions. As long as you are amicable, then you don't even need to involve lawyers. But if it's not amicable and you can't agree to anything, that's when you need to get lawyers involved, and it takes a lot longer. So I think I've been waiting 2 years to get to where I am now. It depends on every state you're in, every country you're in. So I've been reaching out to the few friends that have gone through it with children to ask them for opinions and help. There's no straightforward answer. You have to get a lawyer, decide on all the things through them, and then work on finishing it off.
How long did the separation period last? Did you decide and just move out quickly, or did you continue living in the same place?
So in Australia, you have to be separated for a year. It doesn't have to be physically separated, but you have to be separated for a year before you can file for divorce. So in that year after we were separated, we were living in the same house for 6 months, and then he moved out.
And then when we were talking about reconciliation topic, you mentioned you were very clear and that was not on the table. But was he on the same page? Did he try to work things out or make your family get involved in any way to patch things up?
My dad did try in various ways to patch things up, which actually infuriated me even more. You know, when someone tells you you have to do something, you're most likely going to not do it. That is how I am. If someone tells me I can't do it, I'll be like, let me show you how I will do it. Or if someone tells me that I have to do something and I don't want to, I will make sure I don't do it. Because I'm a Leo. That is my personality. So I don't think that helped the situation at all when someone's like trying to tell me how to live my life. It did not help.
There is a little rebel in you, and I love that. I think that's what also given you strength in a lot of different points in time and clarity. But this whole divorce period is also a lot of emotional period for all parties, for you, for your parents as well. Do you think the whole divorce as a taboo in South Asia had anything to do with how your parents supported you, or rather the lack of their support towards you, but rather supporting your ex? What is your thought on that?
I think they would have supported anyone who tried to keep it together. And I think it's because of definitely the South Asian shock and scandal of a divorce. So I remember when people would divorce before me in the community, they kind of just like went away into their shell and they didn't stay prominent because everyone would be gossiping about them, including my parents. I remember the things that they said about Anne was, thank God it's not our children. So I know what their opinions on divorce and separation is. But me being me, I was kind of like, you either accept me or you don't. So I just stayed the same. And honestly, the community has changed so much that I don't feel like they care that much at all. I think that my parents feel it's an issue because they retired and moved back to Sri Lanka, and that world there is very different to here. And they're not here and they don't see that the community doesn't care. But overall, I think it's really hard for South Asian women and men to go through divorce because of the scandal or the taboo nature that is associated with it. I think it comes from a place of worry and stress about the unknown, whether or not, you know, you can survive on your own financially, or and I guess it's because of their own family dynamics where they're both quite codependent on each other. Like our parents' generation is quite codependent. Very rarely anyone got divorced because it would mean that you would need to fend for yourself in the world, which would have been very hard as a woman to do in their time. You know, now it's very different. I said that to my mother once. I said, you couldn't do this. You wouldn't have been able to do this, but I can. I have my own businesses. I have my ability to rebuild myself. That's what I'm going to do because I'd rather that than what I was in.
Yeah, some very critical topics you've touched on, and we'll come to the financial independence part also in a bit. But coming back to the taboo and the shame associated with divorce in South Asian families, you've mentioned that the local Australian Sri Lankan community has been overall supportive for you and they are not ostracizing you in any way, which is great. Are you going back to Sri Lanka ever and confronting those situations with extended family or people back home who are not living in Australia?
We don't have a very big extended family in Sri Lanka that I have a relationship with. It's my auntie and uncle and my grandfather are the only people that I go see in Sri Lanka that are not my friends. And they all know what's happening and what's happened. Actually, I don't think my granddad knows. I don't think he'll ever be told the truth about it because he's 95 and I don't know if my parents have ever approached that topic with him. And like I said before, I'm so used to just doing my own thing and like not being affected what other people think and say. So I think that it affects a lot of people as well because you feel the shame and you feel the tabooness within you because there's a lot like that in other aspects of my life that I had to get over.
I love what you said. You are so used to doing your own thing. I think that's what a lot of more women need to have the courage to do that. So going back to then the finances part, and you also said that for many women, it plays an important role. And for women, they can be especially more vulnerable situations because they may have paused their career or if they've taken maternity leave or something from work. But you had thriving businesses at the time. But you also mentioned that COVID had impacted your businesses. So how was the financial vision then? And did it influence your decision in any way?
It did. I think I stayed for longer than I should have because I was scared of the financial implications, even though I was in the situation I was. I know so many women who don't even have jobs, so I can't imagine what they're going through and they have like multiple children and no job. That's a very scary situation to be in. And knowing that I had my businesses, which straight after COVID, they did go through a boom because now everyone wanted to get married. It still was absolutely terrifying. And I think this year has been the hardest. Ever since I've separated, it's been really rough financially because I'm paying lawyer fees, I'm paying half the mortgage on this house, I'm paying utilities, I'm paying bills to keep myself and my daughter alive. Finances play a huge role on whether or not someone stays or goes. I think a lot more women would leave unhappy marriages if they had a financial backing a lot sooner.
That's a fair point because that is an important practical consideration and needs to be factored in other than the emotional aspect of it. So, as we've talked about, the separation, the divorce process is, really tricky for adults and everything that's involved. But also having a child in the mix can add to the complexity of the situation. And if you're comfortable doing so, if you can tell us how the custody situation worked out for you, if the lawyers were involved, what kind of advice or support you were getting from family.
Yeah, no advice and support from family because no one has gone through divorce with a child that are close enough. And no two cases are the same because no two child is the same. I think when you're going through that, you really have to see what is best for that child and take out your emotional relationship with your ex. What was best for my daughter or any child is to have that loving and safe relationship with the mother. I think that sets you up for happiness in a child's life. The happiness of the child is in direct proportion to the happiness of the mother. And if you have an anxious mum, you'll highly likely get an anxious child. So one of the biggest things that I had to do was first stand up for myself and understand my emotions. I do a lot of kinesiology, which is like therapy with your body and mind together. That's been one of the biggest things that I've been addressing because I want to make sure I'm the best version of myself for her. And then in terms of like custody arrangement, we have like during a fourth night, he will have 6 nights, I will have 8 nights. And we determine that according to her schedule during the week. While she was young, we did it more that I was the primary caregiver like the weekday and then he was on weekends because it worked with our work schedules as well. And also I think while she was a lot younger, she just needed me more. So that's been quite straightforward. Of course, there are situations that you don't always agree with the co-parent, but I think that happens with any relationship, even if you are together. So it's about navigating through that and seeing what's best for the child.
So, with this whole journey that you've had so far, how would you say, where are you today in the process, personally as well as professionally?
I don't think divorcing, separating is easy by any means from the situation and the environment I was in. It is such a huge burden on the shoulders and on my life. I just think like, oh my gosh, I can't wait for this to be over. In 2 years, I'll be in such a different place. Until then, I feel there's still so much darkness that comes and goes. When my current partner was here, my body physically felt safe enough to relax after a very long time. That journey has been hard and I think continues to be hard in different ways, but it's nothing compared to where I was 2 or 3 years ago. So I always look back and think, this is where Helani 2002 would have wanted to be, and that's always nice to retrospect.
And I can definitely say that after my divorce was finalized, it has not been a straight line, but there have been so many moments of glimmers of taste of freedom that I felt or a sense of relief. But it has always been in some cycles of also suddenly feeling all those emotions because, as you said, you are still carrying on with the rest of your life. You're not stopping and taking just years off to heal. You are healing as you are living life. And that also means you're parking some emotion on the side and at some point they come back. But I have tasted this freedom and to be able to relax. And it's been much more powerful and deep because suddenly you also realize that, oh my gosh, I didn't have this for so long. You are already way ahead of me in your healing journey. And I'm excited to hear from you in 2 years' time. How do you feel? So you mentioned that you have a partner, and that's also amazing to see because that's also quite an optimistic situation. What are your thoughts on also dating after separation? How did that evolve? How has that also been a part of your healing journey?
So I met someone whilst I was already in the mindset of leaving, and I had already been trying to leave for about a year. I met someone that was like, Helani, you're amazing, you know? And that really pushed me to being like, oh, there's more people out there who will actually show me love and support. And while we're not together, that was the part that clicked in my brain and just gave me a further push. And then since then, I do believe that the partner you have is someone who mirrors who you are. So as I grew and as I changed, not that I was actively looking for anyone. And 10 months ago, I met Karthik. He slid into my DMs. I think I was in such a good place where I was so comfortable and happy with who I was. It was just like a really nice place to be in. And I remember at that time, I wrote down on a piece of paper my ideal guy, because I had just also like met someone like 2 weeks before that. And there were so many things that I was like, I don't want that. It was just like, I just met him, we were just talking, but I was like, oh no, I don't want that. So I wrote down like a very specific list, and one of them was emotionally aware, everything. And yeah, that's when I met Karthik. I don't think I ever gave up on love. That is the difference. Like when I talk to my mom now, she once told me, she was like, but they're all the same, you know, they're all the same. And I was like, no, I don't believe that. Maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, I used to think that. But my mind slowly started to change. So I started to experience kind of people. And I never gave up. And it doesn't mean you won't get your heart broken, or it doesn't mean that you won't get hurt, or there won't be a lesson for you to learn in somebody else. All these are lessons for you to learn, and they're all leading you to, I guess, a partner who can grow with you. Because no one's perfect. You just have to be brave enough to take the chance and, I guess, not give up on love and see the lesson if it doesn't work out.
I love it that you say that you haven't given up on love, and that's what also made you continue with such optimism. And I'm glad you found a partner like that for you. Maybe I could just ask one more thing here, that what are you actively doing differently now in this relationship, being where you are and having experienced what you have?
I was very particular to know my self-worth and to find someone who also saw my worth. I really wanted someone who would just look at me and be like, wow, she's so beautiful. And it's not that I have to be beautiful. It's I want him to see me that way. What I wanted to actively do in this relationship is not let my trauma from my past ones affect this one. Have open communication. So one thing about Karthik, in the first few DM messages, I was like, look, I have trust issues. This is not going to work. And he was just like, no problem. How can I help? That was his response. It wasn't pushing me away. It wasn't a panic. Oh my God, she's got trust issues. I can't handle this girl. He is just so confident and grounded in himself that he's like, that's okay. Let's talk about it, you know? And that's how he approaches my trauma. There's been some instances where what we've noticed is like, if he's tired and angry, he'll be hangry and then he'll complain. And in my mind, complaints is like, no, this is the same thing happening again, you know? And my mom will be like, get out. It's honestly actively been like any tiny little thing that will remind me of my past relationship will be like, get out. It won't even be like, give him another chance. It will literally just be like, run. So it's about articulating that and communicating it and knowing, trying to differentiate what is your mind acting out of fear from a past belief or what's real and what's actually happening. And that has been the biggest thing to navigate between the two and be conscious that I'm doing that differently in this one.
Actually, a bunch of very good tips also, you know, the fact that the trauma of your past, how it should not affect your new relationship and how you're navigating. A lot of learnings for our listeners here. What is the one advice you would give to someone who is in the middle of making a decision to divorce or is recently out of marriage and is trying to heal?
Trust your gut. You already know what's right. It's just a matter of cutting through the fear and taking the action.
Before we end, is there anything you want to say that we haven't asked you and it's on your mind that you want to share with our listeners?
I wish anyone that is going through it the absolute best of strength, love, and happiness. And just know that even if you're going through a really dark time right now, it's not going to be like that forever. And please hold on to that. And you are so capable of making anything happen. It's about being brave through the fear, doing it despite the fear. And that is the thing that will lead you to more happiness on the other side, much better place than you are now.
That's a lovely note to end then our episode today. It was very insightful. Thank you so much, Helani, for today. It was lovely talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a great thing that you are doing as well. And being able to share this with the world will be great for all your listeners.
What I loved about this conversation with Helani was the confidence she had, the poise it carried, and the underlying theme of bravery vis-a-vis changing old or inherited patterns. It almost starts with Helani being an immigrant child who kind of had to deal with, quote-unquote, the old world approach of her parents in Australia. This seemed like an awakening moment for her in some ways, but in some ways, the story she tells about her change, it was almost like this persona of her was waiting to be unleashed. She wants to find her own voice, use it on social media to reach other women, possibly struggling in a similar situation in a marriage, and being the example for her daughter for going after the life you want without apologies. There's very little that's easy or simple about divorce. But at least having that moment of clarity, as Helani did, is really valuable. And we really do wish her all the best for the rest of her journey. You can find out more details about her and her businesses in our show notes.
Thank you for joining us. If you valued this conversation, please share the podcast, rate it, and subscribe to Sunoh wherever you get your podcast from so that you get notifications with each new episode. It helps more people to find us and join this community. You can also find all the details about the guest in the show notes as well as on our social media pages. Please note that this podcast is for informational purposes only and does not replace legal, therapeutic, or other professional guidance that you or someone close to you may need, catering to their specific situation. If you are in a dangerous situation, please contact the nearest hotline or authorities where you can find the help you need. Since our podcast caters to global audience, we are unable to share a lot of country-wide resources. But I'm sure your country, your state, your city, wherever you're listening from, has some resources available for you. To share your story or feedback, please reach out to us. Thank you for listening.